All right, let's get going just so that we can have time for discussion, uh, possibly end a little bit early, which is always very exciting. And yeah, let's dive in. So I will give you, can everybody hear me okay? First of all, we're doing okay? Okay, good. Again, should I wear my headphones? Should I not? All of the decisions. A quick overview of today. I will introduce myself first of all, and we will be doing some fun interactive activities, which I'm sure you're also all very excited about. And after we talk about kind of what is assessment and what assessment is not, and some of the exciting new developments around assessment as kind of an academic discipline, we're going to hear from Sarah Williams about how co-curricular assessment is happening, particularly assessment of student advising. So assessment is a college-wide effort, right? We're doing it everywhere already, actually. And I see my role as someone who can coordinate all of the work that's already happening across the college. So here is my introduction to me. I grew up in rural Oregon. I went to grad school in Indiana. I graduated with my PhD in 17th century poetry in 2016. So I've now lived in kind of 3 different regions of the country, which is pretty fun. I have about 10, 12 years of experience teaching composition primarily, but also things like professional writing and literature and poetry courses and digital humanities. My most recent experience is with teaching and researching in digital humanities. So I have experience with qualitative statistical processing of historical poetry. So if you really want to listen to me talk for about, conservatively 45 minutes, ask me if computers can read poetry. And I will happily explain all of the different valences to my response there. So since 2016, I've held a variety of both faculty and administrative roles. I helped run a digital humanities center at Indiana University. I was doing professional development for faculty in the 5 colleges. I was also faculty at Amherst College for a couple of years. So I have a lot of experience across multiple arenas of higher education. And most recently, I was an instructional designer at Holyoke Community College. So I got that firsthand experience of not just being faculty, right, but also helping faculty from kind of a meta level, think about best practices for teaching courses. So I love talking about teaching. That's another thing I would happily spend a bunch of time on. So today, I always like to model the things that I'm discussing. So one of the things that I'm modeling today is a quick and easy assessment usually called pre-post assessment. And let us launch. I'm going to launch this Zoom poll. And I'm asking you all, which area of assessment are you most excited to learn about today? So you can choose one of these. We've got a couple here: the equity-minded assessment, learning outcomes, assessment of advising, ISLO assessment, the assessment cycle, data-driven decisions, right? So I'm seeing responses are coming in. This is always interesting because I get to see what you all are interested in, which is not always the same thing as what I'm interested in, right? The reflecting on the kind of pre-post assessment practice, right? The very easiest way to do this is to have the exact same set of questions, both before you introduce a topic and then to recap after you introduce a topic. So I'm doing a version of that. It looks like responses are slowing down, but we still got some people coming in. Let's see. Interesting. While I'm waiting for a little bit longer, I will also just say, if you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat. I'm hoping that we'll have time at the end of today for discussion and question asking. So if you think of anything that you'd like me to return to, please just drop it in the chat and we'll get back to it. All right, let's call the poll here. I'm going to share results. So can you all see these results, or should I move my screen? Can see them? Great. Great. Equity-minded assessment and learning outcomes. All right. Followed by data-driven decisions, looks like. Very cool. Okay, good. I was hoping people would be interested in data-driven decisions, because I am also. And here we found out, actually, I'm excited, especially about equity-minded assessment. I didn't expect you all to be so interested in learning outcomes. That's very cool for me. So, right, I've already got some information that we can spend some more time on talking about learning outcomes, right? So this assessment I like, it's a quick formative assessment in that it helps me tailor what I'll be talking about just from that brief, right, discussion. Or a quick interactive activity, I should say. All right, so let's leave that up. And I've already covered this outline, right? But briefly, we're going to talk about what, why, and how do we assess, and then we'll end with next steps. Spoiler alert, I need y'all's help. That's the next step. But before we get there, I want to tell you a little bit more about what assessment is, right? So for some of you who probably know this, bear with me, but assessment is a national field of study, right? It is, I've mentioned, I think it's a scholarly discipline. There's research being done on assessment all the time, right? What are the best practices for assessment? How do we use assessment productively? But outcomes assessment in particular, so student learning outcome assessment, focusing on what students know or should know at the end of a course or a program or a degree. Outcomes assessment like that began in the 80s and 90s as an accountability method, right? Taxpayers who are funding state institutions like ours wanted to see what and how students are learning, right? So it's a mode of transparency. It has absolutely evolved, right? I think assessment started as a kind of, again, compliance and, what's the word I've just forgotten? Compliance and accountability method. And it has moved into something much more focused on supporting student success. So there are a lot of alignments with the equity imperative that Stephanie Williams laid out for us earlier, right? And there are movements toward culturally responsive assessment, towards authentic assessment. There are all of these kind of sub-disciplines that help us think about how best to support the students in our courses. This is a brief list just because as I was new to assessment, I was amazed at how many organizations there are, right? Kind of scholarly collectives. So this one, these are just the ones I'm part of, right? So the National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment, New England Educational Assessment Network, Advancing a Massachusetts Culture of Assessment, and I'm also part of peer networks across the community college, so other people who hold similar positions to mine. And I outline all of that because I think assessment can feel like we're still stuck in the accountability mode, right? But assessment is way more than that, right? It clearly is. We've got a NETCHI visit coming up, and there have been lots of discussions about what NETCHI is and what it means and how we are accountable to NETCHI. But assessment is also a way of supporting student success from an institutional level. And as you can see, just from this short list, there are a lot of groups that are dedicated to that particular cause, right? And so assessment is, in addition to an academic discipline, it's an ongoing process. It is a way of collecting data and evidence and feedback. It is a mode of accountability. It's a way to support learner success. It is always transparent. You're going to hear me talk about transparency all the time, and that's because transparency is fundamental to successful assessment, particularly equity-minded assessment. And assessment is a way to direct institutional support and resources. One of my favorite, a person I was working with at Holyoke last year, Brooke Adams, who is the director of the Student Ambassador Mentoring Program. I think I've got that acronym right, SAM. Brooke said, "I love assessment because I hate busy work." And that has stuck in my brain, and I love it very much. And I'm going to cite it a bunch, right? Because for Brooke and for me, assessment is a way of directing our limited resources. We all have limited time, energy, money, bandwidth, right? So assessment helps us know where we should be focusing all of those limited resources. The assessment cycle is, so kind of building on what assessment is, it typically takes the form of a cycle, right? As I've said, assessment is a continuous ongoing process because it frequently looks like this. There's a lot of different ways to parse the assessment cycle, but I like this one because it's focused on the student, like on the learning outcome piece of it, right? So we start always by defining the learning outcome. And I'll talk exactly about what learning outcomes are in a second. But again, briefly, a learning outcome is what it skills, knowledge, ability, what do we expect a student or a learner to have accomplished at the end of a particular process? So whether it's the end of the course, end of a program, end of a degree, end of a 2-year college experience, 4-year college experience, graduate experience, whatever that is, you define these learning outcomes first. Then you think about, all right, well, what does a successful version of that outcome look like, right? You determine how you're going to measure what success looks like. You plan and execute the data collection for your appropriate measurement of success. You analyze your results, you make improvements, and then you start over again, right? By adjusting learning outcomes or defining new learning outcomes. And I'm going to mention a couple of my favorite things about assessment over the course of this. So another one of my favorite things is Keston Fulcher has a model of assessment called Feed Pig, Weigh Pig, which I love. Like that clicks in my brain. Again, rural upbringing, small farm, like that clicks in my head really well for some reason. So the Feed Pig, Weigh Pig model is basically you are raising a pig for meat, right? You start with, you have a goal weight for the pig, right? You know how big you want that pig to be. And to get there, you have to feed the pig, but how much do you feed that pig? When do you feed that pig? How do you know if you fed the pig too much? You're constantly weighing the pig. That's how you know, right? So you are feeding the pig, you're weighing it, and then you're feeding the pig again, right? So that constant like back and forth between goal and information, right? Between the place you're going and the data that you have about it. I've mentioned data a couple of times already, right? And I want to pause because I think, and data came up a ton this morning already, which is, again, I'm very excited about. But I know that in addition to assessment kind of feeling like an evaluation, right, or a criticism at some point, I think that people get scared by data. Data feels like machine learning, like stuff that, I don't know, algorithms and AI use. But data is simply information. All data is a fancy word for the stuff we know. You can get data through surveys, through focus groups. Student grades are data. Participation in class is data. Papers are data. Test scores are data. All of this stuff is data. And any data-driven decision is a decision that you've made based on reliable information, right? My favorite example is changing a test question because multiple students just did not get that question. That's a data-driven decision. I saw that students weren't getting it for whatever reason, so I changed it. I've made a data-driven decision. And I have another Zoom poll for you all, which is copied here in the slide. But what I'd like you to do is identify which of these is not a data-driven decision. So option A, the U.S. Department of Higher Education designated Holyoke Community College a Hispanic serving institution once enrollment of Hispanic students hit the 25% threshold. Option B, I really disliked group work when I was a student, so I never make group work a part of my lesson plans. Option C, in a class of 26 students, I have heard from 8 that the font size on my PowerPoint slide is small and hard to read. I recently increased the font size from 14 point to 18 point. Or option D, I gave a thumbs up to a movie on Netflix because 80% of people who liked that movie also liked a given TV show. Netflix is now recommending that TV show to me. So people are still answering. And I will stop talking briefly so you can get a break from my voice as well. People still answering. Okay. All right. Looks like we're about reached our cap here. So let's end the poll and share results. Right. So the option I had meant, right, is option B. I'm curious, are people who answered for option C in a class of 26, right? This one's a little borderline, so I'm interested in what people think here. I've heard from 8 that the font size on my PowerPoint slides is small, so I increased my font size. For anyone who answered that, are you willing to put in the chat or to unmute and say, what about that is not data-driven? Very curious about this response. Let's not eat the pig. Sorry, I missed that. Right, that is an option as well, right? I'm coming from the 4-H background, which means that the goal is to eat the pig, but I can absolutely see how that is a preference. Anyone willing to volunteer? All right, I'm gonna guess. You tell me if I'm wrong. So the reason I said, right, the option C is kind of borderline, right? And what I'm guessing people are saying here, number isn't significant enough. That's, yep, exactly it, right? Number isn't significant enough. So we've got, what is that? It's almost 30%, right? That's not too bad, but it's not a majority, right? And we are, and so this is where, how many students would have to tell me that the font size is too small, right, before I consider it significant? So that's something I'd want to think about, right? What makes a number significant enough for a class of students? I lean, my again, instructional design background, I lean toward universal design principles kind of consistently. So if Joni, I was going to say that 1 is enough for me, right? But that might not be the case for everybody. So thinking about what your definitions of data are, what are your data parameters? This is an individual choice, and we can talk about best practices too, right? And universal design would say 1 is enough, right? You can weigh your effort versus the output for students. I would want to know how many students found that an improvement before I continued with the practice. So if 8 students asked me to change the font size, I would want to know how many of those 8 found that font size change adequate, right? And this is the assessment cycle, then I would readjust font size again. So if people were like, actually 18 point is still too small, I would then increase it more. Or people are like, actually it's too big and everything's crowded now, I can't see it again, I would decrease it, right? So that responsiveness to information, that's the important piece of data-driven decisions. So thank you all for that, indulging my data-drivenness. And I'm always very happy to talk about data-driven lesson planning actually as well. And I think I saw Anne Dumont here, but I will also recommend Anne Dumont as an incredible resource. Like, we are so lucky to have Anne and Kim here as our consultants in teaching. I'm just so blown away. So that's my little sidebar on data-driven decisions. I want to briefly say, we've talked about what assessment is. I want to mention what assessment is not, because one thing I really want to emphasize is that Assessment has nothing to do with evaluation, right? And I will repeat that a few times because this is super, super key. This is one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear. I hear people say, I'm worried about assessment being used for my job security, right? I'm worried about being punished for my assessment results, right? What if students don't learn? I'm worried about my job. Those are absolutely not the same thing, right? Assessment is not a reliable source of information for evaluation. It simply isn't, right? Talk about data-driven, having those that clarity around what is useful data for whatever decisions we're making. Assessment is not useful data for evaluation, right? So it cannot be used and should not be used for evaluation. Assessment is not about punishment. Assessment is not interested in like gotcha questions, or it's not interested in failure. Assessment is not about challenging expertise. Again, my role here is a coordinator for the things that people do in the areas of their expertise, right? I am not an expert in math. I could not tell you the best way to assess math learning outcomes. I am not an expert in advising. I cannot tell Sarah how to do this, right? That would be wild. I absolutely cannot make that kind of decision, right? What I can do is provide structure and administrative assistance and, again, scholarly best practices for how we want to move forward in supporting our students. So I have just talked a ton at you all. Let me pause very briefly. And, actually, Maureen, here's an example of me not being an expert. What is the MCAS?
That's MCAS, and it's, I like to call it the Massachusetts Child Abuse System. Tongue in cheek. I mean, it's not, I'm not making fun of abuse at all, you know, or neglect or any of that. But when I moved from Vermont as an educator, and I'm an early ed faculty member, and that is my field of expertise, and also elementary ed, I came here and there was a lot going on with the MCAS, Massachusetts, I don't even know because I hate it so much, Comprehensive Assessment System. And what has happened, the short story is, and this impacts all of our students, and this is one of my, absolutely, I'm seeing everything here. This is one of my step on my soapbox moments before I retire, if I ever do, which won't be for a while, and I also have 4 children who have been through the Massachusetts system. What it does is it punishes teachers, it punishes districts, it's an equity issue, because it is interested in failure, and it does make teachers teach to a test because they lose their jobs. And so if there's anything I can do, or any of us can do, we need to keep pushing back on that. But our students associate assessment, and so all of my syllabi say this is, my assessments are not, and in capital letters, they are not high stakes exams. Assessment is ongoing. Assessment is what you do in the classroom. And so this is one of my passion points, but I could tell you a very long story now that I'm 30 about all of this and the impact it's had on districts, most importantly on children, on families, on inequity. And yeah, that's it. But that's one of our big problems. And our students think that assessment is high stakes testing. And so, yeah, that's all. Anyone can add anything else? I'm loving all that I'm seeing in the chat. So, okay, that's all for now.
And you'll probably, everyone who talks to me will tell, like, instructional design, we know that summative kind of testing is not useful for demonstrating learning, right? We know that kind of high stakes summative experience is not a good reflection of what people know and are able to do. The equity issue is absolutely there, right? How do you know? I think back to taking the SATs. Like, I'm old enough that there were only the 2 sections, right? I think now there are 3, right? Where there's a writing section as well. But you can take classes to do better on the test without actually knowing anything more, right? That's not we're not measuring learning at that point, we're measuring compliance, right? And if we're measuring compliance, let's at least be clear that we're measuring compliance, because maybe there's situations in which that could be useful information to know. But I think, like, yeah, Maureen, that this is really, we want to know what people are learning, not about how good they are at taking a test, right? So that key distinction, and that's such a valuable point about our students, right? Because this is what we're doing here, right? We are working to help students who, like us, have come out now of a very hard couple of years, coming out of, we'll see, I don't know, we'll see. We're still in the middle of a difficult time, right? So the ways that we can support people in our classrooms, that's the priority. And we do this primarily through clear and clear and measurable learning outcomes, right? So we have a couple of different levels of learning outcomes. And the thing that I want us to be thinking most about as we move forward institutionally is institutional student learning outcomes, or ISLOs, right? Those all stem from, though, course learning outcomes, right? The skills and outcomes for students in a single course. So for example, when I was teaching composition, the big goals were to be able to write a thesis-driven, research-oriented paper, right? There are a lot of skills that go into that. So all of the skills are things like be able to write a strong paragraph, have a clear thesis statement, know what constitutes reliable information. Those are all versions of a course learning outcome, right? Because I can measure those. I know what a good paragraph is, right? I know what a strong thesis is. I know what reliable information is. Those are things I can measure how well students do or don't achieve those skills. That scales up then to program student learning outcomes. So skills and outcomes that students will gain across across an entire program. And then we move up into institutional student learning outcomes. What a student will know and be able to do upon leaving an institution. And that big not catch-all, because we have institutional student learning outcomes that we have all agreed on at Mount Wachusett. But ISLOs are so fascinating because they're a lot like gen ed outcomes. They are a place of convergence for students and faculty outside of academic departments and majors, and represent an opportunity for focusing on learning and student experiences that isn't found elsewhere in the institution. So ISLOs are the things that students will gain through every interaction that they have with our institution. So for example, CREATE is one I think about a lot, right? CREATE as an institutional student learning outcome. Students learn how to create in programming courses, right? Programming is very creative. Oh, Roseanne, will we be changing the label on our syllabi to CLOs? That is up to you. I don't see any, I find that a helpful acronym, right? A helpful common terminology, but I don't have personally, that's up to y'all, right? And there's shared governments that can agree on what the preferred labeling is, but the goal is that students know what's going on. So if you have a terminology that works, keep that, please. Don't change things for the sake of changing, right? These learning outcomes contribute to the student's overall experience. Yeah, absolutely, Roseanne. Right. So yeah, this is a great example of questions. The learning outcomes are the full student experience of the college. Right? So the ISLOs are where a lot of work has already been done. So much work mapping ISLOs. One of the reasons I was excited about this job is that you all have mapped ISLOs. Let me tell you, that's not the case across the Commonwealth, right? Not every community college in Massachusetts knows what their like gen ed or ISLOs are, and even fewer have mapped them. And so that is a real strength that we are starting from at Mount Wachusett. right? And I see this, again, I'm mentioning kind of strengths starting positions because it is ongoing. There is more to do with ISLOs. Because these learning outcomes, student learning outcomes, course learning outcomes, program student learning outcomes, ISLOs, these are a promise that we have made to students. This is what we are telling them. This is what you will learn while you are here with us. And that is a key piece of providing transparency and agency to learners. If learners know what is expected of them, they are better able to take control of their own learning. Clarity around learning outcomes is an institutional promise that we have all committed to. Okay. And this is why we do assessment. Because we want to advance equity by supporting every single one of our students, especially those people who have been disenfranchised by circumstances that happened before any of us were alive, right? We are here to advance equity by supporting every single student, by delivering on our promises that we have made in the learning outcomes, right? So we assess to direct resources as we want to support the students who need us. And this is where equity-minded assessment comes in. Equity-minded assessment argues that assessment should strive to serve as a mechanism that helps close opportunity, persistence, and attainment gaps between different student populations. Also, I love this article. If anyone wants the full citation, let me know and I'll send it to you. I really enjoy it. But some of the fundamental principles of equity-minded assessment are that it disaggregates data. So it separates out student data by demographic, typically race and ethnicity based on federal categories. Equity-minded assessment involves students. One of the things I'm really excited about is that Sarah and I are working on a focus group structure because students should be involved in their own education. And to me, that means from the bottom up, right? How are they assessed on how well they know what's going on, right? Or what they're being taught in class. It pays attention to context. That includes institutional context, that's North Central Massachusetts, local context, and that's student context. Who are our students? What challenges do they face? Do they need childcare? Probably, right? Do they need basic needs support? Probably. That's our student population. And equity-minded assessment embeds equity everywhere, even as it is transparent with processes and results. I'm going to, yeah, I will. Okay, it's very, very good. I really like it. I'm going to pass this over. I will look this up now as Sarah is talking. So I will hand it over to Sarah to tell us more about all of the work that's happening in advising.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to see like over 100 people are excited about assessment. It's a really great opportunity. I come from to assessment from a place of appreciation for the work that is done here at the institution as an opportunity to highlight everything that is going well and the work that we're doing to make improvements. When developing the assessment plan for the assessment of academic advising here at the institution, I had three kind of categories. The first one is that of the student experience. So what is our student experience when it comes to advising? How and when do our students engage with advising? And what information and support? Oh, sorry, Amanda, can you? Thank you. What information and support do our students receive, and how do they feel about this? What is their experience with the kinds of supports that they have, the information that they're receiving, the timeliness of that information, et cetera. The second part is that of our advising experience, or that experience of our advisors. So what do our advisors need to support students? How do our advisors engage with students, and what best practices exist across the institution? Through this process, it became clear, if you take a moment and sit back and think about where our advising offices live, we report up to 4 different vice presidents, which is really kind of exciting in some ways, because that means advising is embedded in the majority of the work across the institution, but is also challenging in other ways when you're looking at continuity of services. And then we have institutional processes. So what procedures exist to inform our institutional processes, our decision makers, how are we collecting that information, how are advisors and students then engaged with that? And do we have modalities for collecting that feedback? Amanda, could you click the next slide? So these are some of the things that we've been working on with the assessment of advising. Like I said, I've conducted focus groups with each of the advising offices. Many of you have also participated in focus groups with our faculty advisors, as that's part of like my next stage. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. I developed the advising assessment team with representation from each of the advising offices. This was very intentional. Like I said, with such a decentralized advising model as we have here with our special pops that report up to different members of leadership, having almost like a ground up approach for assessment has been my approach. So we've had members of each of the different advising teams present and part of this decision making when it comes to the development of the assessment plan and how we are going to assess advising, and taking into account the differences that each of the offices have, while also setting a foundation of what our expectations are for all students. And then from this, utilized the information collected from the Portrait of a Graduate survey to build out student learning outcomes. So we took the Portrait of a Graduate survey was one of the most recent documents to collect student feedback. So we utilized that to build out our student learning outcomes, our advising outcomes, and assessment methods for our May and July accepted student registration days. And then based on that, used the results to inform our survey practices for those students who are registering in August. Part of assessment is communicating all of this out to all those members who are impacted by assessment processes. So to make sure everyone was aware of the modalities of the assessment processes, the surveys, why we were asking these questions, et cetera. We provided workshops to advisors about not only the assessment process, but kind of the why. Like, why are we doing this assessment? What are we looking at? How is this information then going to be used to inform and improve our practices in supporting students? Amanda, could you slip next slide? From the advising, Ellen, that's a great question. I will get back to that in a second. From the advising assessment team, we came up with these 3 student learning outcomes. And this was focused on our new student registration appointments. All students are required to go through a new student registration appointment. It's our onboarding process for our students, and it felt like a great place to start when we're looking at an assessment process. So as a result of their new student registration appointment, new MWCC students will know how to access iConnect with an emphasis on their email. As a result of their new student registration appointment, new MWCC students will have a better understanding of college policies. And as a result of their new student registration appointment, new MWCC students will feel empowered to build personal connections to campus by connecting with college professionals. The format and kind of process for this is based on the NACADA assessment procedures. So we're rooting our work within that to build out these student learning outcomes. And then this has then been implemented in surveys that we're sending out to students, and then will be incorporated into focus groups in the fall semester. Ellen asks, how do the ISLOs fit into the advising assessment or not? That is a great question. And I don't have an answer right now for you, but I can, it's definitely something that I think would strengthen this. So one of the one of the things that I've learned through advising assessment and kind of building out these models is that like generating the buy-in for assessments. And that's why I keep commenting on how excited I am that so many of you are here, is probably the most challenging part. And as we're kind of building out those assessment tools and getting buy-in, it's takes a long time. So I think that's definitely an aspirational goal, is to make sure that our advising ISLO, or our advising student learning outcomes, kind of align with the institutional ISLOs as much as possible, just to reinforce the continuity of student experiences across the institution. So, but that's a great question. Can you click to the next slide? Okay, and then we have some plans for falls, and this is very much like very quick plans. We have a lot of different plans, but I want to like just highlight some of the things that we have going on. So we are surveying our students who are brand new to the institution, who are beginning as of August 1st through AdDrop. With the purpose that these students are a unique population of students that we already have institutional research on, and we're going to look at how kind of like a twofold assessment. How are our students identifying whether or not they're meeting these student learning outcomes? And then how is the conversation regarding student learning outcomes impacting how our advisors are leading their sessions? August is when we have the majority of our enrollment. Roughly 40% of our fall enrollment comes in August, and 2/3 of our new student enrollment comes also in August. So it's a significant population of students, and that's why we're kind of focusing in first on August, and then we'll kind of branch it out to be more continuous as we have this data built up. This is a continuous communication cycle with the advisors. This is very important, not only to keep them updated and to share this information, but also to then gather feedback about their experience as professionals. What are things that they need to know? How are they then best serving students? Sheila, that's a great question. I'm going to get to that just at the end of the slide. We're also collaborating with SGA, our Student Government Association, to facilitate student focus groups and make sure that the students are really engaged with our assessment processes, and helping to identify like how do we get students involved. And I think asking them how you want to be involved may be the easiest way, because they're not answering my survey. We want to find ways in which we can connect with them and ask them, how then are you going to be involved in this process? As we're going through and building out the assessment processes, we're looking at these in two kind of distinct areas, if you will. One is looking at the process of assessment, the survey mechanisms, the focus group mechanisms, and then the other side is the content. So that way that content is interchangeable with whatever, with our initiatives as we learn more and doing more, but we have an established process that then we can look at, say, like, is this the best way for us to be collecting this information? Are we able to utilize this interchangeably? And that's where some of like our focus group conversations will come from, and other things that may be coming down the pipe. Apply those results to our advising best practices. So as we learn from our students that they are meeting and looking at different things, then we're going to be able to share that back with the advisors and incorporate that into those best practices. The advising assessment team met bi-weekly in the spring semester. We're going to continue meeting monthly to continue working on that mapping of the student experience, student learning outcomes, and assessment processes. This is an ongoing process because we're also building it to meet the needs of our students and our institutional structure. So it's not like a purchase survey such as CESI. This is something that we're building in, so this is something that we could do regularly. If you've listened to my other assessment conversations, I talk a lot about a regular and routine assessment, that these are things that we're always doing, like either on a semesterly basis or yearly basis, but these we're building up the amount of data that then we can use to inform decision making later on. And then continue to collaborate with faculty advisors to develop an assessment process. And Sheila, thank you, no worries. Absolutely. So like I mentioned, in the spring semester, I had an opportunity to do focus groups with some of you, which was really great. I would like to start that up a little bit more, and I'm going to survey you. Now, Amanda, would you mind launching it? And kind of ask like, how do you want to give feedback about assessment? How do you want to engage with assessment? So if we're asking you, one of the challenges has been trying to put your finger on what actually is advising and what is incorporated into advising, and how does that, you know, is it more than just registration? Is it coaching a student through classes? Is it all of it? Is it talking about career? Like, how does faculty advising fit into this? How do we kind of build out a method that's going to be meaningful and achievable on both the faculty side and on the student side? I'm glad that no one has put that they want to send someone put that they want to send long letters through the US postal system. I love mail, so but you're only getting my college address, just for the record. I am always open to talking about assessment. It's become a real passion of mine because I think that there's so much opportunity with it, and gathering that feedback and then being able to take that feedback and take action on that to improve the role of our students. And this gives us a mechanism to do that. Okay, awesome. Awesome. Are students given the surveys via email or text or other? Right now, we're using SurveyMonkey, which has an embedded tool within it that kind of tracks whether or not a student has done it. But again, that's where identifying what that process is, there might be a better tool for us to utilize that's going to yield better results. And once, so that's why I kind of distinguish those two items. Yeah, I know, President Vanderhoeven, that you're joking, but really like 56% of email goes unread completely. The interesting part, though, with SurveyMonkey is that it does track if students are opening the email, and most of them are opening the email. They are like just not doing the survey, which is just really, really kind of interesting. Awesome. My door is always open. I'm located on the Gardner campus on the first floor. And please feel free to throw yourself on my calendar. And I realized I talked a lot longer than I was supposed to. Sorry, Amanda.
It is just fine. This happens to me too. That is absolutely the thing that I have been talking at people for 10 years. I should know myself by now. But I wanted to end quickly with the timeline for next steps for assessment. So I mentioned I need your help, right? I need you to help me develop a system for ISLO assessment that works for Mount Wachusett, right? So I will be sending you all an email with this recording of this session, as well as a survey about assessing our own professional development day offerings. But for ISLO assessment, this fall you're going to be seeing a lot of me. So congratulations, or I'm sorry, depending, because I'm going to be talking with a bunch of all of you as faculty and union reps, right? I'll be attending school meetings. I'm hoping to institute a working group, right? Because this plan needs to reflect the needs of our community. And I'd like that to go through Academic Senate in January, right? So that's the timeline here. Please come see me. I am in W19. I'm in IR, so I'm in that lovely little Wetmore area. I'm on campus Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, always available for remote appointments. And I have 2 different email addresses that you can reach me at. I commit to all of this in all of these meetings. I want you all to bring me problems, right? So I can't necessarily offer official confidentiality, right? That's way above my pay grade. I don't know. That's way too much for me to be thinking about. But I do commit to a non-judgmental problem-solving space. So bear with me. We've got to do our post-assessment. Really quickly, post-assessment, which area of assessment did you learn the most about today? So while we, at the beginning, asked, what are you most interested in? What did you learn the most about today? See, I love this. Wow, this is so interesting, you all. Okay. Everything is super tied. Wow. Okay, this is incredible. Right now, truly, we are kind of neck and neck between most of these, which is this is what I love about this pre-post, because it tells me that while people might not have said or thought they were interested in assessment of advising, 22% of you right now, that's what you learned the most about, right? So that tells us something really valuable about how this session went, right? So I know I'm over time. I apologize to Kim. Thank you for your patience. It's really quick. I ended that poll early, but here's the poll, right? So we learned a lot about a lot of stuff today. So, okay, I have to stop talking. Please email me with questions. Thank you so much for your time. And I really look forward to meeting all of you individually.
Great. Thank you so much, Amanda and Sarah. Really appreciate it. Great presentation. And we need to exit this meeting and go to Kim and Ann's link on your agenda. And just know when you put your seatbelts on.